So as they said, I'm David Joyner. I'm Executive Director of Georgia Tech's OMSCS program. Just to give you a quick little background on what that even is. We're a online master's program run by Georgia Tech. As of this semester, we have 10,800 students, 13,700 seats, which is if one student takes 2 classes, they count as 2 seats. And we have over 2,000 cumulative graduates. I think it's actually over 3,000, but I ran out of time right before this trying to get the current number. For this talk, what I'm going to do is talk about what I see as the 5 milestones in creating this program, which are its inception, its launch, scale, then growth, because you have to be prepared for scale before you can actually grow, and then more recently our independence. And then I'll close with some lessons, principles, and wishes I have for the future. I've rehearsed this 3 times, and it's come in at 25 minutes, 40 minutes, and 120 minutes. No, not 100, 80 minutes. So I will either run way short or way long. We'll find out which. So to start us off, the inception, which I say is wherein a band of visionaries came up with a radical plan to change higher education and somehow got approval to do it. And I can say visionary because I wasn't involved at the time, so I'm not being self-complimentary when I say that. The program was conceived in September 2012. Sebastian Thrun, then the CEO of Udacity, visited Zvi Galil, our dean at the College of Computing, and proposed a master's degree for $1,000. $1,000 was a little bit too low, but we thought 4,000, somewhere in that range might work. The college held a bunch of town halls, meeting groups, things like that to explore the idea, and eventually voted to create it. AT&T graciously put up funding to get the program off the ground. And then it was voted to proceed by the Board of Regents with a projected tuition of $6,600, so higher than originally, but still a fraction of the cost of ours and other comparable on-campus programs. Summer fall 2013 started the development of the program, and then it launched in January 2014. I'm guessing most of us work in higher education, so you might think that I've left a 0 off of one of these calendars because it sounds like the kind of thing that would take 10 years to get approval for. But it went from conception to launching in about 15 months, which is just a ridiculous pace for something like this, as you all know. The reason why I think that it was able to be conceived and birthed that fast was that it aligns very heavily with Georgia Tech's mission. Georgia Tech's mission has always been around access to education and both insofar as serving underserved audiences and in reducing the costs of education. So it very heavily aligned with what we see as our role. I think we were interested in experimenting with MOOCs as a delivery mechanism. This was right on the heels of their big coming out party, and so we wanted to see what they could do. And we were also seeing, especially in computer science, an increased demand for lifelong learning. And so we have to find some way to get people a way to do lifelong learning that doesn't involve things like take 2 years off of work, move your family to Atlanta for 2 years just to get a master's degree. No one can do that. So we had to find some way to do that. The actual the model for how it would work would be that we would keep the accreditation, the rigor, the reputation of our on-campus program and meld it with the affordability, the scalability, and the accessibility that we had seen in MOOCs. And the overlap between those two would be what this program would be all about. It would be just as rigorous, just as accepted. It's the exact same credential as our on-campus program, but preserving the affordability, preserving the flexibility that we had seen with MOOCs. So towards that end, there's lots of traditional elements actually. Students apply to the college the exact same way they would for the on-campus program, exact same portal, everything like that. They must enroll using the exact same registration system that our on-campus students use. They pay tuition, they have to meet GPA requirements, all that is exactly the same. They do the same assignments. Assignments are submitted via learning management system, graded by human TAs. All the assessment is the exact same kind of thing we do on campus. And they have to meet the same graduation standards. So they still have to complete 30 credit hours and the requirements of one of our specializations to graduate. And so it's the same degree. That thing at the bottom, an online campus for a traditional degree is the exact way we think about it. Students could already get their MSCS degree for us at the Lorraine campus or other campuses we have around the world. Online is just another one of those, but it's the same degree no matter where you get it. There are unique elements, of course. When we say that it's an online program, we don't mean online in the traditional distance learning fashion. It's built to take advantage of what you can do in an online environment. It's affordable, as we said. It's $40 per class, so it's between $6,900 and $8,400 for the entire degree, depending on how long you take. It's inclusive in that we scale our capacity based on TA availability, and we actually have plenty of applicants for TA positions. So we can let in anyone who is qualified, which leads to a much more diverse student body, because you're not just letting in the top percent. And it's flexible. It's built with a working professional in mind. We don't require them to tune in at 10 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because no working professional can do that. We don't do it evening classes either, because no parent with a kid who plays soccer or anything like that can do that either. So it's all asynchronous, all remote. You never have to come to campus, and you never have to tune in at a particular time. Assignments are open for at least a few days. For the student body that's come out of this, it was built with those 4 pillars in mind, which makes it accessible to full-time employees, which are almost all of our students are full-time employees. Most of them are parents with kids at home. Many come from non-traditional backgrounds. Non-traditional in this case would be people who might have a PhD in chemistry, something like that, and want to add simulation ability to their skill set. And they're all lifelong learners. They're all coming back to education, generally from some time away. I put international students in yellow because early on, we saw that the program was very heavily domestic, actually. Our early classes were 85% students here in the United States. That's actually started to, has been going down consistently as the program has gone forward, to the point where this semester, I believe we're 65% United States. So we're seeing a more international audience. And I put economically disadvantaged students in red because in theory, that doesn't really happen, because to get into the program, you need to have a bachelor's in computer science. And so you're already from an audience that could afford to go to a 4-year college to get a BSCS, everything like that. We're actually seeing that happen a bit more often. We're seeing some people who've come who've really, they have a bachelor's in something completely unrelated, and then they've taken community college classes, but they're not from the background we see from the rest of our students. But for the most part, that's more something we see when we generalize some of what we learned out to our undergrad audiences. So the admission requirements are technically the same as on campus, 3.0 GPA in CS or a closely related field. You have to take the TOEFL. No GRE is required, and you have to have letters of recommendation. But I say technically because, and I don't know if y'all can see my cursor, but over here I have a little illustration. Our minimum qualifications are the exact same for online and on campus. But on campus, you always accept the best, 400 applicants, however many your capacity is. So it really doesn't matter where you set this line. It could be up here, it could be down here. I mean, as long as it's below right there, what you say the minimum qualifications are don't really matter, because you're always going to accept the best X. For us, because we accept everyone who meets our minimum qualifications, where you put this line really matters. And one thing we've learned is that we really don't know where to put that line, because we have people who don't have a background that would suggest they would succeed in this program, but they get in and they work their butts off and they succeed and they get an MSCS. And then we have people who have a BSCS from a good school, have been working this offer for years, who get in the program and struggle, either because of balancing the demands of the program with other things or for whatever other reason. So finding actually where you put that minimum qualification is a difficult challenge. It's a place where it's very nice to have such low tuition, though, because we don't have to feel guilty that we're taking advantage of people who we let in who might not end up succeeding. It's not what you see on campus, where a single semester costs 5 figures, and now if you don't complete the program, you're out that money. For us, you kind of have a trial period built in. So we generally take the philosophy that if we think there's any chance you can succeed, into the program and let's find out. We want to give as many people the chance to succeed as possible. So to launch, we developed the first 5 classes over that first 9 months, and then been building classes over time since then. When we started, our course development teams would partner a professor, a video producer, and a course developer. Professor being the source of knowledge, course developer being an expert in online teaching, and video producer being an expert in media production. Started with a virtual whiteboard format where professors would actually write on a white screen. Very heavy emphasis on pre-producing content. So once you get in the recording studio, you have most things already ready to use, and you're just actually doing the presentation. And we experimented with some interesting ideas. A couple of our most popular classes actually are taught by multiple professors at once, because if you're just going to record it once and reuse it for a long time, you can afford to say, let's get 2 or 3 people all in the production process at once, whereas you couldn't do that semester after semester in an on-campus environment. Over time, we've drifted from that writing format to something more pre-prepared. So on the right, you see what is a little bit closer to what we do now, where we have more images, and our using media to direct attention. But we had some early questions because we really wanted this master's program to be a comparable experience to what you would get on campus. And so we were curious about how students would collaborate and how we get them enough feedback and how we would hire enough people to deliver a high quality product. And so what we found though, is that when you take these different ways of making the program more accessible, you get a unique student body. You get different backgrounds, you get different professional experiences, you get different interests, you get different motivations. Then when you pair that with what I call student empowering tools, which give students more ability to communicate directly with their classmates, what you get are some unique pedagogical benefits. And these were things we noticed not long after launching the program. In fact, we identified 8 particular ones that really resonated with us. We saw a lot more incidents of students initiating discussions of course content. I always say it'd be weird in an in-person class for a teacher to, or for a student to raise their hand and say, hey teacher, I know you have an agenda for today, but I have something I want to talk about. It doesn't really happen in person. But online you can do that because your forum post, your discussion topic is not taking away from this scarce time resource that is allocated to the professor's agenda. And so you have a lot more student control over the kinds of things that are discussed. And students have a lot more ability to choose what they want to actually discuss. In person, you have that dynamic where today we're going to talk about X. And if only half the class is interested in X, then the other half is going to be bored the entire time. But online, you can self-select and decide what you're actually interested in participating in. What we see a lot of here is that in fields like AI, where we have a lot of students who are new to AI, but a lot of students who have been working professionally in AI for a while, what we'll see is the students who are experts in AI, they gravitate towards their own discussion threads to discuss the big picture kind of things. And the novices gravitate to their own discussions where they talk about kind of the newer ideas. And so students are able to self-select into what discussions are most appropriate for their ability level. And the discussions continue for weeks, months. On campus, it's the class is, if it's 50 minutes long, then when for us, it's when the whistle blows. That's what indicates when our classes are over. When the whistle blows, the class is over and the discussion is over. Online, that doesn't happen. This discussion can continue for as long as it does based on its own content, partially because it documents itself. Everything that you share in the discussion is automatically added to this ongoing log, which has been really fun for us because we've had places where we were able to say at the end of the course, remember what we discussed at the beginning of the course? You don't have to remember it. We can actually go back and read it and say, you said about this topic that you thought AI had this role in the current world. How has your view changed? Because you're actually able to see what you yourself said back then. So it leads to some really interesting opportunities to leverage the fact that everything is persistent. There's a lot more student-to-student feedback also. It's the same kind of thing. When a student asks a question in an in-person classroom, there's a lot of value in having a classmate answer it, but it's also a little bit odd for a classmate to say, hey, teach, I'll take that question. This doesn't happen that much unless the professor is running a class in that fashion. Online, that's natural. In fact, we use Piazza, as many of you might, where it very deliberately says, this is where you get an answer from an instructor, and this is where you get an answer from a student. And students are able to answer each other's questions extremely rapidly in a way that both gets a good answer to their classmates faster, I think also fosters some nice community building in the class because it's kind of, we're all in this together, we're all helping each other in a way that doesn't necessarily happen in person. One of our most fun early experiences was finding out that when you have an environment like that, you have individuals who will emerge as what I call de facto teaching assistants, where they're not paid, they're not employees, they're students in the class, but they're so helpful that they may as well be teaching assistants. They're answering all the questions, they're helping their classmates. And very often that's actually how we've ended up hiring new TAs, is we've said, hey, Bobby was one of the first ones who was like this. Hey, Bobby, you were so helpful in this class. Would you like to now be paid to do exactly what you did as a student in the class because you were so helpful and so conscientious in answering questions? And so many of our TAs have been hired that way. Bobby, she's actually still with us as a TA 5 years later because it's online, you don't have to go anywhere. We use peer review a lot in our program. And what's nice about that is it's not just getting feedback from other people who are in the exact same position as you. If you're writing an assignment in a class, you may be paired with someone who's worked professionally in that field. And so you're getting much deeper feedback than you would just from peers who are at the exact same position as you are. Same thing kind of applies for teaching assistants. Many of our teaching assistants have rich professional experiences. So you're not just being graded by the person who got an A in the class last semester, you're being graded by someone who has a background in this field professionally. And then my favorite part of it is that is what I call organic student-instructor communication, which is that, when you walk into a class, it's kind of, I'm the person on stage and I can kind of run the class, but there's very clearly a difference in role. Online, you can just pop into discussions that students are having and interact very casually and very informally and very organically. I love to just pop onto the course forum every day and just be able to drop a bad joke or something like that, which is a lot easier to do in this environment because you're interacting with people in a much lower attention kind of environment. It's not everyone is staring at me as I say the following. It's, I'm going to comment this to you real quick, but everyone else can be the third person in that interaction. Everyone else can feel like they're the only other person at that table. So that's why I enjoy about teaching it. So what we find is that making the program more accessible gets us a diverse, interesting student body. And then the platform makes it so they can have more of an impact on their classmates. So we actually leverage that unique student body. So then that was the launch of the program, what we observed early on about what it's like to teach online. Then it came time to scale. And I very distinctly remember kind of an emergency meeting we had about 2 years into the program, which was, we're running out of on-campus teaching assistants. We hire one teaching assistant for every 50 students who enroll, but we're running out of them. We have 400 on-campus students, and at our current scale, even if every single one of them was a TA, we wouldn't be able to reach our current size. So how do we do it? Do we auto-grade? Sometimes auto-grading is really nice, especially for programming projects where automated feedback is very authentic to the content. When you're coding, you're actually trying to create something and interpret the output from the compiler or interpreter or whatever to figure out what's wrong. So their auto-grading is very natural, but what about for essays and things like that? There's efforts to create machine learning graders for essays, but very often, even if they can demonstrate reliability in generating a grade, they don't generate feedback usually. And so a student might know, okay, I got a 60 out of 100 on that essay. I have no idea why. I just know that I got a 60 out of 100 because the system said so. And that's not good for learning. And I also don't think it would stand up to the scrutiny if students complain about that. So we can use auto-grading in some places, but it's not a way, you can't, I don't believe you can generate or deliver an entire MSCS program via auto-grading alone. To use peer grading, a lot of simpler programs use peer grading. I'm not comfortable with peer grading. I think peer feedback has an extremely important pedagogical role to play as a learning exercise, as a way of putting yourselves in the shoes of the critic and interpreting someone else's work, and as a way of getting more feedback from your peers. But for generating grades, I don't like it. There is research that says that it can be reliable in very specific circumstances. I'm not confident that we can always recreate those circumstances. And even then, I think if we're going to be giving a master's degree, part of what we're asserting there is that experts in the field, whether they be the professor or teaching assistants at the direction of the professor, have looked at your work and vetted that it is good. So I don't think we can deliver the entire program via peer grading. So that leaves us with the idea of getting more TAs, but we ran out of TAs. Where will we find them? Well, we could find them online, but we had this early hypothesis that our online students wouldn't be teaching assistants. They're older, they're more educated, they're more experienced, they're already employed, they already have families, and they're paying less in tuition, which means that if we gave them a tuition waiver, it's not worth nearly as much. That's one of the main incentives for on-campus students to be TAs is they get a tuition waiver. So it's very lucrative. Online, they aren't paying much in tuition, and we don't give them a tuition waiver either anyway, because they're part-time students. And so we figured they're not going to be interested in being teaching assistants. And we were right about all the stuff above. They are older, they are more experienced, they're already getting paid a lot more than we can pay them. But we were wrong that they wouldn't apply. The very first time we tried to recruit online students as teaching assistants was summer of 2015, I think, maybe 16, one of those. It was a class where all our usual teaching assistants were going to be gone on internships during the summer, so we couldn't offer the class unless we could hire online teaching assistants. And so I was the instructor for that class. I'd been the TA previously. And so I just emailed the previous two sections and I said, hey, if a couple of you are interested in being TAs, even though you're online students, then we could offer this class during the summer. Let me know if you're interested. And we got over 60 applicants. 60 people were interested in being TAs. We hired 10 of them, which was just as many as we needed because of the number of students interested in taking the class over the summer. And they were fantastic. They knew what it was like to be online students. They were dedicated to the role. And now I say 4 times as many OMSCS students apply to work as teaching assistants as we have capacity to hire. It's actually higher than that. I think it's now 8 or 9 times as many, because we have very low turnover. Most of our TAs, once they sign up to be a TA, they're a TA for 2, 3, 4. I have one student who's been a TA for 6 years. He graduated 3 years ago, but he stuck around after graduation. So we have many more students applying to be teaching assistants than we have capacity to hire. And that's why we've been able to scale to the level we are. Now the question is, why was our original hypothesis wrong? Could it be that there's just enough traditional demographic students in the OMSCS program to supply the TAs? So we looked at the demographics of the students applying to be TAs, and we found out that's not true at all. Our online students applying to be TAs, almost all of them were significantly older. 40% were over 34 years old, whereas none of our on-campus applicants for TA roles were over 34 years old. They were almost all employed full-time. About 1/3 had children at home, twice as many had advanced degrees. So they weren't just the more traditional type of students that we happen to find in the online program. They were the non-traditional students that we anticipated wouldn't be interested in this. So that begs the question, maybe our beliefs about their motivations were wrong. Maybe we were wrong about why students are TAs in the first place. Maybe they are doing it for altruistic reasons. And so we surveyed them. We surveyed all the applicants for teaching assistant roles for one particular semester to ask why they were interested. And we gave 12 motivations based on a prior little exploratory survey we'd given to try and explore their possible reasons. And then we grouped those into 3 categories. Extrinsic were things that were monetary. Basically, I give you something quantifiable in exchange for being a teaching assistant. Intrinsic were things that they personally benefit from, but in non-materialistic ways. So an improvement to their understanding, improvement to their resume, the ability to network. They get something out of it, but it's not something you just sign a check. And there are altruistic reasons that were purely, I want to give back, I want to help, I like helping my classmates, I like helping instructors, I believe in the program and I want to help it succeed. And so what we found was when we compared the responses of the online students applying to be TAs to the responses of the residential students applying to TAs, almost none of the online students were extrinsically motivated, which isn't surprising because the online students were being paid $15 an hour with no tuition waiver, whereas the on-campus students were being paid a monthly salary, a monthly stipend, plus a tuition waiver. And the end result was that the on-campus students were getting effectively about 3 to 4 times more out of the role than the online students because the tuition waiver was so valuable. But even looking at the secondary motivations, online students very rarely were interested in that as one of the main incentives. One of the bigger gaps was in the intrinsic motivations. That over half of online students applying to BTAs were motivated by something they would get out of the role itself. The improvement of their resume, the improvement of their teaching ability. For most of them, for about 20%, it was they wanted to learn the material better and they recognized they would learn it better by being a TA for the class. Whereas for the residential students, many reported that as a main motivation, but it was far behind what it was for the online audience. And then even more interestingly, for the altruistic reasons, almost 40% of the online students reported their main reason was they just wanted to give back. 16% said their main reason was they wanted to help the online program. They appreciated the opportunity that they had. They recognized that we need teaching assistants to open that opportunity to more other people. And so they wanted to serve in that role. Others wanted to help classmates, to help improve the class, things like that. Whereas relatively few of the residential students said that as one of their primary responsibilities or primary motivations, and fewer mentioned that as one of their secondary as well. So in the end, we found that our online students who were applying to be teaching assistants were differently motivated than our residential students, which on its own isn't surprising. We all would have figured that would be the case. What we had assumed was that there'd be so few who were adequately motivated by those other things that we wouldn't be able to find enough people. But what we found is the opposite. That's been enough to scale the program. This semester, I received from my classes, I think 237 applications for teaching assistants. And I'm going to end up hiring, I think, 8 because most of my TAs are returning. And so the capacity is there. And we've been able to scale in that way. As of fall 2020, this is the breakdown of our TAs. We have over 300 teaching assistants employed by the program each full semester, which is interesting. I think this semester we have more TAs in the program than we had students our first semester. Each of them works 15, 20 hours a week. The main responsibility tends to be grading, but they also answer questions on the course forum. They run office hours, they implement auto-graders and things like that. The responsibilities really differ heavily from course to course. And for the breakdown of it, we're now at a place where the plurality of our TAs are actually alumni of the online program. 114 of our online program alumni have stuck around as teaching assistants after graduation. 110 more are current students in the online program, and then the remaining are either on-campus MS students or on-campus PhD students. So the 2/3 are either online current students or online alumni, with online alumni making one of the biggest portions. And I love that for also a philosophical kind of reason. There was an article in Inside Higher Ed a few years ago, I'm assuming the author isn't here, where the author said why he wouldn't teach online was that an online class ends, but an on-campus class never ends because students come back and visit and they feel connected and everything like that. And exactly the opposite is true, because online classes never really have to end because you leave campus when you graduate. You don't leave the internet unless you're going to go, live in a cabin in the woods. No one leaves the internet. And so these students are able to stick around as teaching assistants after they graduate to continue to give back, continue to help classmates, continue to help the program grow, because it integrates with their regular life. To do that in person, you would need to find someone who's going to stay in, for us, Atlanta after graduation, and who after working 9 to 5 could come and do the traditional TA responsibilities on campus. Online, the flexibility is there that we see so many students wanting to stay involved after graduation. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we hear from most alumni to stay involved to be teaching assistants, is that they just want to stay involved, and it's the best way to stay involved. So then once we've set up the mechanisms for scale, once we realized, all right, we can probably hire as many teaching assistants as we need, it came time to actually grow. So here's just our data over the years. This is our historical admissions data. Applications have been rising. We thought last year we had finally leveled off, and we're going to, balance out with our number of applications per year. And then it jumped to our all-time high this year. And it jumped to our all-time high this year before COVID hit the United States. I was of the belief that we know that during recessions, enrollment in graduate schools rises. We know that right now people don't want to move or go to in-person classes because that's been its whole other issue of in-person attendance. And we know that right now, with the economy being what it is and the cost of college having risen so much, no one wants to spend $100,000 on a master's degree. And those three factors I anticipated were going to be a perfect storm that would lead to a massive surge in applications to our program. Our application deadline for fall was March 1st, and so it happened before COVID took root in the United States. Our application deadline for January was July 1st, and we saw a 10% jump in applications for January year over year, but we saw the same thing for fall. And so we didn't actually see a big COVID bump, I don't think, but we did see a big bump overall, that our application percentages are rising again. This fall, even though we were already at 9,800 students last spring, this fall we let in our biggest incoming class of over 2,000 students. So in theory, one day we'll find a steady state. That day has not come yet. So, and the question we often get is, doesn't this just cannibalize your on-campus admissions? Why would students pay to go to the on-campus program if this online program is there? These are our on-campus application numbers since the program launched. Right here is where the program launched. And so they were rising a little steadily over time. Since the online program launched, applications to the on-campus program have, I can't do the math in my head, almost tripled since then. And so it's certainly not the case that the online program has cannibalized the on-campus program. I would optimistically argue that the online program has raised our profile and has driven more interest in the on-campus program. It's also entirely true or possible that this is computer science, and so maybe this rise would have happened anyway. But it's certainly not the case that we've seen a drop off in on-campus applications since we launched the online program. In fact, they've grown tremendously. And we find that's largely because the online students are differently motivated. One of the main incentives for students to come to the on-campus program is the visa to be able to get in the country and find permanent work after that, which we don't offer in the online program. And so the demographics of our on-campus program are very different from online. They're catering to different audiences, and so they don't eat into one another. Our historical enrollment data for seats, which again is the number of individual courses being taken per semester. As you can see, it's rising term over term. Summer semesters, we offer fewer classes, and so enrollment tends to drop a bit. Many students take the summer off as well they should. During a normal semester, students will take about 1.3 classes each. So most students will take one class. About 1/3 will take 2 classes. But that's been rising all along. One of the questions we get a lot is about the gender ratio in the online program, because we know CS is a very male-dominated field and we don't want it to be. And we want something like this to be an equalizing factor, but we also know that online education tends to be a relatively male-dominated area as well, in part because online education tends to align with fields that themselves have been traditionally male-dominated, and in part because there's the knowledge that online environments can be far more hostile to women. There was a study early on asking why more women didn't apply to our program, and there was a fear about unmoderated course forums and being forced into those environments. What we've seen is that since our program started, the percentage of women has risen steadily semester over semester to the point where our most recent incoming class was 20% women, which is our all-time high. Still far, far, far below what we want it to be. It's headed in the right direction, and it's coming close to what the on-campus ratio is. And what's also interesting is when you break this down, what we find is that international students, the gender ratio is more balanced. Domestic students is where you really see this. I'm sorry, when I say domestic, I mean here in the United States. So here in the United States is where you really see this big gender difference between men and women in their participation in computer science. And we also know the online program is still more attended by United States audiences. And that actually explains the gender difference that we see in the online program. The ratios of international men versus international women are the same in the online and on-campus programs, and same for women. It's just that we have far more United States students in the online program. But as that trend has converged, I think that's part of why we've been seeing our gender split improving. So I'm hoping that will keep going in the same direction. Where we're even more happy with what our results have been has been in race and ethnicity. Our on-campus program tends to cruise at about 8% underrepresented minority students. It's been rising a little bit over the years. Our online program cruises at about 14-15% underrepresented minority students. And so it's already a significantly larger percentage. And then when you put that up against our actual scale, the difference is enormous. We have, 10,600 students this semester, I think, and 14% are from underrepresented minority backgrounds, which means 1,400 students in our program come from these underrepresented backgrounds. And so in terms of raw numbers, it's making a huge difference in the number of, in the diversity of the computing field. We've interestingly also seen that convergence, that initially it was a very heavily American-dominated program, and that's been slowly going down as time has gone on. A couple of years ago, for the first time, we enrolled more Asian students than white students, and that's been continuing to spread out. And so the online program demographics have, over time, been aligning more to the on-campus program, but our ratio of underrepresented minority students has remained pretty consistently where it is, which is exactly what we'd like to see. I think programs like this have a real risk of exacerbating existing inequities. And I think it's important for us to devote very strong attention to making sure that we're not doing more harm than good, that in the quest to make things more accessible, we're making things more accessible to everyone, and especially those who specifically have not had access in the past, as opposed to just a rich get richer kind of mindset. And we're always also asked about the program retention rate, because we know MOOC retention rates, dropout rates are relatively high. We cruise at about a 70% retention rate, which means 70% of our students who have ever enrolled have either graduated or are still enrolled. And so that's about what we want to see when we have such when our admission standards are so much more accessible, so much more open. I'd be concerned if we saw a much higher retention rate, because I think when you're letting students, any student in who has a chance to succeed, you should see more students realizing that the program isn't for them than if you were only taking the top small percentage. Over the years, I'm gonna go through this quickly because you can actually find a paper about this from Learning at Scale a couple of years ago. What we've identified also are some best practices that we use for other programs, different ways to do human evaluation to make sure it's fair. You can randomly assign students to graders. You can divide them into sections that each have their own dedicated TA. There are ways to scale that preserve the fairness, the reliability, and the accuracy, and still get students very good feedback. There are ways to integrate a reliability. You can build it into the math of the system. You can do training exercises in advance, even with large TA teams, or you can look back at what the results are and figure out where the inequities may have occurred. Group projects online have been an ongoing kind of interesting thing because students very often dislike them because they are so spread out. What we find is if you let students self-select into project groups, you can actually see some really interesting things happen. Randomization is great for fairness because then it doesn't give anyone a particular advantage. We do some exercises also to help students find their own groups and find their shared understanding. The course forum is what I consider to be the analog for an in-person classroom. It's where the questions get asked, it's where the discussions happen. I've started to use a mechanism nowadays for a designated forum TA where one person is generally responsible for handling the forum all the time. That's their main role because it's enough work to justify a single person's full job. We've done things where each TA takes a day, each TA takes an assignment, things like that. And then some classes just get by with knowing their TAs, really enjoy interacting with students, and so everything just kind of takes care of itself, and they don't need a formal mechanism for that. Office hours has been an ongoing kind of interesting one as well because students want it, but it's not clear what they mean here because office hours in some ways are what we're doing on course forums is answering personal questions, doing those kind of discussions. Some professors do video office hours. Some do things where the students submit questions in advance and they film kind of a supplemental lecture. And then I like to do chat office hours where I basically say, hey, I'm always on Slack or Teams or whatever we're using that semester. Message me anytime and I'll probably be there because this is my job. So. Plagiarism is also an interesting one. We know that plagiarism really doesn't happen more often online than it does on campus, but at our scale, it opens up a lot of opportunities for us to use some systematic tools that would not be justified by a very small class. And then there's some cool things we can do online that it'd be difficult to do in person. One is mentorship, which is our TAs, because they have professional backgrounds, they can play a stronger role in helping individual students. One is building more formal online communities at scale because we have enough students to focus on that. We have the scale to do cool little competitions where students are able to build agents that play against each other. And then we also have classes where we hand off instruction in the class from instructor to instructor while keeping the same video content, which lets there be more perspectives in the teaching process and things like that. So that's been fun to see. The fifth phase is very recent, as in the past month, which I'm calling independence, where we go our own way. One of the biggest reasons for the success of the program is that as a program staffed by CS people, we can build the things that we need to succeed. So there've been a lot of these. I'll go through these quickly. This was if you look at the comp ed paper we had last year, you can find some more details about these. But we built AI tools for administering good form experiences. We've built our own code plagiarism detection tools. We've built our own mechanisms for doing peer evaluation, for doing participation policies. We've built our own auto-graders, we've built our own tutoring systems. We can do all this because we're CS people. And so we're in the position to build the things we need to build to succeed. And same for students. OMS Central is a student-run course review system that's fantastic because it's completely outside of our purview. So students can say whatever they want. So it's very honest, very transparent. And it's completely student-run, student-built because they're computer science people, they can do this. As of this semester, we actually now run entirely on university purchased platforms. We in the OMSCS program no longer have a MOOC partner. We do our tools we use Canvas, we use Piazza, we use Kaltura for video, we use Gradescope for grading, we use OnDeLock for proctoring, we use Office 365 for everything that Office 365 does. We use peer feedback, a kind of homegrown tool that's spun out into its own company for peer-to-peer review. But our commitment to open content remains. All the video content, all the course material still remains available at udacity.com. We now also make it directly available via our own website. And we're launching new MOOCs through edX and Coursera to make that content the foundation for future MOOC offerings. So we're at a place right now where we can run the program, we can give grades, we can do everything we need within only our own ecosystem. There's no external partner needed for that, but there's still rich opportunities for external partnerships to also push forward the open content, open access angle. So now it's kind of more of a, here's our content that we use for credit, and now let's use this to build an open experience. So I'll close with just lessons we've learned, principles we have, and the wish I have. I'll actually skip over the principles because, again, that's in one of the papers. What we've learned is that there was sufficient demand long run to offset our startup costs. So there was a lot of upfront investment into the program to get it off the ground, but we ended up having enough students that we would have made that money back if it was a loan or anything like that. We found that the online program did not cannibalize the on-campus program. They appeal to different audiences, and the audience that the online program appeals to was not being otherwise reached. We see evidence that underrepresented students enroll more in a program like this for whatever of many reasons. I have lots of hypotheses on why that might happen, but most importantly, we see that happening. There are things we can do to push that forward even more. I think I'm happy that the ratio is twice what is on campus. I still want it to be higher. We know that online students' motivations are more intrinsic, which can pose unique challenges for our courses. On-campus courses, if you have a course that students are able to sail through and get an A, many students are perfectly happy with that. Online, we have many students who will say, I'm not in this just to get my A and get out. I want to really do something authentic and interesting here. And so there's more demand on designing good courses there because the students that's what they're there for. They're not just there for the degree, they're there for the experience. What we find is that alumni tend to self-identify more as alumni of the program than of the university, which is unfortunate because they are full alumni of the university. They're full students, exactly the same as everybody else. And so work needs to be done to help online students feel connected to the university. And then the shift that students are undergoing in entering a program like this, it's not as fundamental a lifestyle shift as they're undergoing when they move to an on-campus program. And so there's a lot of students who kind of lose track of what starting the program is like. What we also find is that we're able to scale instruction pretty fast, scale advising pretty fast. There are places where a program like this intersects with university infrastructure, and those are often hard to scale. When you have separate departments for integrity and for student advocacy and things like that, there's going to be impact on those environments as well that you have to account for. Program level retention is very high. Relatively speaking, I'd say 70% is where I would want it to be in this case. And so you have to allocate resources knowing that. You can't, assume that students are going to drop out, so you can assume a narrow funnel. At the course level, though, we see very high or much higher withdrawal rates online than on campus, mostly because students aren't in a rush to graduate so they can move away from Atlanta and get on with their lives. If I need to take an extra semester, it doesn't really affect anything about me. And so students very often are able to say, I bombed the first test, so I'll just drop and try again next semester. And that informs how you design your course, because you have to assume a non-trivial number of students in my course have already started this course before. That changes how you have to design things. If you look at the paper from Learning at Scale in 2017, these are all on my website that I'll put the URL up for in a minute. It's called Squeezing the Limeade. We give 7 principles for how to leverage scale. But I'll close with my one wish for where we're going. As COVID-19 has pushed more traditional content online, we should consider the relationship between these emergency online initiatives and future MOOC offerings. What we basically see is that instructors are already filming lots of course content, and that could be the foundation for new open offerings. We could do a lot more now because it's not a matter of adding MOOC production on top of someone's busy schedule. The content is already being produced, and what we need to do is build MOOC experiences on top of that. So we can leverage this situation to open up new learning initiatives. I don't know who I heard say this first, but there's a quote that's never waste a good crisis. And this crisis is a great place to really push harder on making more content available. What we see right now is that, generally speaking, there's been two, prior to COVID, there have been two kind of separate ideas. Traditional education has existed. It's synchronous, co-located, come to campus, come to class in person. And then MOOCs and OMSCS both operate under the same model. It's asynchronous, it's remote. And so we have those separate. And there have been things in between. There's been distance learning and things like that. But traditional education has been the big thing, and the MOOCs were really the new kid on the block. But there's so much more we can do in this area. We can build experiences that are synchronous with the regular class. But if you're in, and we have this going on this semester, if you're in, Shenzhen, China, for example, but you're taking a class at Georgia Tech, you can have an in-person cohort of students. So you still have that live engagement, that live interaction with classmates, even though the class you're taking is far removed from you. You can have distributed cohorts. You can have remote students attending synchronously with dedicated support from a teaching assistant to make it so they're more of a first-class object in the development of the course, the delivery of the course. You can have local cohorts. You can have infrastructure spread out. There's so much we can do with the current technology and the initiatives that we're already pushing on, that we can create what we call a distributed classroom, a classroom that's not bound by the walls of this class and the time that it's scheduled for, but it can extend across time and space, giving everyone access to this high quality, credit-worthy experience, even if they aren't able to move to Atlanta and attend classes live, but without also pushing them all the way to the other end of the spectrum and saying, if you can't be in this room 10 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then you are asynchronous and remote. We can have more delineation there. We can say, all right, you can't come to the class in person, but you can attend Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 p.m. after your kids are in bed. And we can find 15 other students who can do that all together. And so you can have a cohort of students going through the course as well. You have the live feedback, the live interaction. There's so many things we can do in this area to fill in the rest of the blanks within what is possible with regard to remote, co-located, synchronous, asynchronous. And we owe it to ourselves and our students to give them that opportunity. If that idea sounds fun, we actually have a book coming out next fall. Dean of College Computing, Charles Isbell, and I wrote a book called The Distributed Classroom. It'll be published by MIT Press in about a year, describing that idea. So that's all I have. I ran under my total allotted time, but over my intention. If you want to see more about me, davidjoyner.net. If you want to hear more about our program, omscs.gotech.edu gives you the information about the program. lucylabs.gotech.edu is my lab website, where a lot of the research we do is about the online master's program, as long as our online undergraduate initiatives, as well as some student projects on online education as well. Jim Losey is going to present one of those later this afternoon. And if you want to contact me, I'm david.joyner@gotech.edu. So thank you all.